They said my grandfather was too old to maintain his property, that he lowered the value of the neighborhood. So the HOA forced him into a nursing home, without compassion, without care. But what they didn't know was who he truly was, and more importantly, who I had become. They took away the soul of our home, so I took away the heart of theirs, and turned it into a place that would honor him forever, whether they liked it or not. The man they wanted to erase. My grandfather, Edward Eddie Hartman, wasn't just a man, he was the cornerstone of our community. He'd lived in Oak Ridge Estates since it was just a dirt road with 3 mailboxes and a single street lamp. Back then, neighbors helped each other build fences, cooked meals during hard times, and celebrated every small victory like it was the 4th of July. My grandpa helped build all that. He was a retired World War II veteran, a mechanic by trade, and the unofficial mayor of the block. Kids came to him when their bikes broke. Men came to him when their lawnmowers sputtered. And women came to him when the HOA letters got too aggressive. He fixed problems with tools, words, or wisdom. But none of that mattered to the new HOA board. Led by Carla Simmons, a woman with no ties to the past and a clipboard permanently attached to her hand, the HOA had a new vision, a modern Oak Ridge, one with polished mailboxes, identical paint shades, strict grass height enforcement, and absolutely no visual reminders of aging. Those were her words, not mine. And unfortunately, Grandpa Eddie had become exactly that. At 87, he walked slower. He sometimes forgot to trim the hedges, and once he left his garage door open overnight. That was enough for them. They issued 3 back-to-back citations. They claimed his uncut hedge was a safety hazard, his rusted mailbox a neighborhood detraction, and his cracked driveway violated aesthetic codes. But what finally pushed it over the edge was when Grandpa tripped on his own front porch steps. They used it as justification that he could no longer live alone. They pressured me, as his closest family member, to consider safer accommodations for him. But what really happened? They threatened code enforcement. They said if I didn't voluntarily relocate him, they'd deem his property uninhabitable and forcefully intervene. No chance to fix, no second inspection, just a final notice and a deadline. I fought it. I filed appeals. I spoke at HOA meetings, but they dismissed me with phrases like, "We're only doing what's best for the community. Your grandfather needs more care than this neighborhood can provide." Rules are rules. Grandpa didn't want to leave. He cried the day we packed his things. I'll never forget how small he looked, sitting in his favorite chair, hands folded over his cane, staring out the window as if saying goodbye to his life. When I took him to the nursing home, he didn't say much, just one thing. "They'll forget me, won't they?" And something inside me shattered. But what the HOA didn't know was I wasn't done. The blueprint for revenge. For a while, I tried to focus on Grandpa's comfort. I visited him at the nursing home every day, bringing him peanut brittle, crossword puzzles, and updates from the neighborhood. But every time I left that sterile fluorescent building, rage curled tighter in my chest. Carla Simmons and her shiny blazer brigade had erased a pillar of our community, not because he was a threat, but because he didn't fit their aesthetic. That's all Grandpa ever was to them, an eyesore. One Sunday, as I sat across from Grandpa in the courtyard, he looked up from a faded photo album and said, "They turned my home into a shell, didn't they?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I ever tell you," he went on, "that clubhouse down the road? I laid the foundation bricks for that with my own hands. Took me a week of back-breaking labor back in '72. I blinked. "The HOA clubhouse?" He chuckled. "Wasn't no HOA back then, just neighbors pooling money to build a rec hall. I built that place, and now it belongs to them?" That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about what he'd said. That building, the one the HOA now used to throw wine tasting parties and enforce community meetings, was his legacy. They had no idea. And that's when the idea took root. I would turn that clubhouse into a monument to Grandpa's life, not just out of honor, but as poetic justice. But this wasn't going to be a simple revenge stunt. I was going to do it legally, publicly, and permanently. Step 1. Find the weakness. Every empire has cracks, even petty little dictatorships like Carla's HOA board. I started by reviewing HOA public documents, their minutes, expenses, bylaws, and, most importantly, the property deed for the clubhouse. And what did I find? Gold. Turns out, when the original community center was donated in 1973, it had a clause buried in the charter. If the building was ever repurposed for private organizational control instead of serving all residents equally, it could be reclaimed by a community vote and a historical use petition. In simpler terms, if I could prove the building was being misused by the HOA and rally enough neighborhood support, I could legally take it back. Now that's the kind of twist Grandpa would have loved. Step 2. Build the army. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed the support of at least 60% of the residents to vote in favor of repurposing the building. That meant dozens of conversations, coffees, handshakes, and a whole lot of storytelling. I knocked on doors with a binder full of Grandpa's achievements, photos of him helping neighbors, building the first fence on the block, volunteering during floods, coaching Little League. Some residents remembered, some didn't. But all of them felt something when I spoke. "Did you know?" I'd say. "The man who built our clubhouse now lives alone in a nursing home because the HOA pushed him out." The reaction was electric. People were tired of Carla, tired of arbitrary fines and rules about mailbox colors, tired of being silenced. In 3 weeks, I gathered over 100 signatures. That was enough to request a formal vote. Step 3. Take the stage. HOA meetings were normally quiet affairs, but not this one. The room was packed. Residents who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up, standing along walls, holding coffee cups and printed emails. Carla sat at the head table, stiff as a board, eyes scanning the crowd nervously. I stepped up to the podium, and I told them a story. Not just about Grandpa, about all of us, how this community had lost its soul, how we'd allowed a board to prioritize power over people, how the building we were sitting in had been built by the very man they discarded. Gasps, murmurs. I saw Carla's composure crack, and then I made my proposal. Let's take this building back. Not with anger, but with purpose. Let's transform this space into something that honors our roots and reminds us never to treat another neighbor the way we treated Edward Hartman. I submitted the petition. It passed with 71% in favor. Carla didn't speak as she left the room. Step 4. Build the dream. In the weeks that followed, I worked with local veterans groups, the town historian, and a handful of volunteers to transform the space. We took down the HOA banners and repainted the walls in warm, welcoming colors. We installed display cases featuring Grandpa's medals, his old mechanics tools, photos from community events over 5 decades. One wall was dedicated to Neighbors Who Built Oak Ridge, featuring dozens of names and stories from the neighborhood's history. At the entrance, we mounted a plaque. The Hartman Community Hall, in memory of Edward Hartman, founder, neighbor, hero. The first day we reopened, I brought Grandpa in a wheelchair. He stared at the walls, his hands trembling. When he saw the plaque, he covered his mouth and began to cry. "You did this?" he whispered. I nodded. "You built the community. I just reminded them." The community awakens. The grand reopening of what was now officially called Hartman Community Hall felt like a hometown parade. Families showed up with folding chairs and coolers. Children ran around with chalk and balloons. Even the grumpy old couple from the cul-de-sac, who hadn't smiled in a decade, brought lemonade. It was more than just a building reopening. It was a statement. We remember, we honor, we stand together. Grandpa sat at the front of the hall beside me, shaking hands with everyone who stopped by. His eyes glistened the entire time. "I thought I was forgotten," he whispered once, gripping my hand tightly. "Not a chance," I said. "You're the reason we're all here." That day, I saw the neighborhood come alive again, not because of rules, fines, or HOA regulations, but because of human connection. But Carla Simmons and her allies? They were nowhere in sight. The HOA's backlash. I knew it wouldn't end without resistance. 3 days after the hall's dedication, I received a certified letter from the HOA's legal representative. Cease and desist all unauthorized use of HOA-owned property. The rebranding of the clubhouse is illegitimate and in violation of updated covenant articles. Blah, blah, blah. They weren't done fighting. The twist? I had anticipated this. Thanks to the original founding charter, the one Grandpa helped draft and that I had copies of from the town archives, we had a legal and historical case airtight enough to seal a submarine. Even better? The local media picked up the story. A popular news station ran a segment titled, "Veteran Forced from Home Gets Last Laugh as Community Honors Him." Within hours, the video racked up thousands of views. People commented things like, "These HOA boards have gone too far. Shame on that board. Good for this family. Where do I donate to keep this building safe?" The tide had turned. Despite the HOA's threat to sue, I filed for a historical site designation with the City Council and attached every document, signature, photo, and video from our campaign. I also included Grandpa's original hand-drawn blueprints from 1972. The council called a public hearing. This time, Grandpa came with me. I'll never forget the moment he stood up, shaky but proud, and told the council in a low, steady voice, "I laid those bricks myself. I bled into that concrete. That place isn't just mine, it's ours. And nobody should erase a neighbor's worth with a letterhead and a clipboard." Thunderous applause. The council voted unanimously in favor. Hartman Community Hall would be protected as a historic landmark, and any attempts to override its public access could be challenged in court. The HOA had been checkmated, legally, morally, and publicly. Carla's fall. The following week, Carla Simmons resigned from the HOA board. No speech, no press release, just a typed-up memo posted through mail slots that read, "Due to ongoing conflicts and threats to my safety, I am stepping away from my role." There were no threats, just accountability. And Carla couldn't handle being the villain in her own story. The rest of the board followed in a slow collapse. One by one, they quietly stepped down or failed re-elections. New leadership emerged. Neighbors who cared more about inclusion and community than petty citations. The HOA had once been a tool for control. Now it was turning into a force for unity, because the people demanded it. And at the center of this transformation stood Grandpa, the man they once cast aside. Months later, I returned to the hall with Grandpa to see the final addition to the renovations. On the back wall, a local artist had painted a mural titled "Roots of Oak Ridge." It showed Grandpa in his youth, hammer in hand, building the foundation of the hall. Around him stood generations of neighbors, helping each other with fences, food, and fallen trees. The entire image flowed like a family tree, each face modeled after real residents past and present. Tears streamed down Grandpa's face as he looked at it. "I never imagined," he whispered. "You deserved more," I said. Now you've got it. A legacy cemented. The fall breeze rustled the leaves outside Hartman Community Hall. A line of kids was gathered near the flower beds, each with a tiny shovel in hand, waiting their turn. Grandpa stood beside me, cane in one hand, folded flag in the other. Today was the inauguration of the Memorial Garden, built on the once-removed patch behind the hall. It was Grandpa's idea, to honor all the original residents of Oak Ridge who helped build the neighborhood from the ground up. Their names now etched into bricks, forming the path through the flowers, a path that started with his name. "Never thought I'd see this day," he murmured, watching a child plant a rose next to his brick. "You didn't just live here, Grandpa," I said. "You built this place, and now it remembers you." Community transformation. Since the rebranding of the hall and the exposure of the HOA's misconduct, things had shifted dramatically. The new HOA president, Marla Jennings, was a retired schoolteacher who'd lived on Oak Ridge Lane for 27 years. She believed in listening first, then acting, a refreshing change. HOA meetings were no longer hostile confrontations but lively discussions. Families showed up with their kids. Seniors felt heard. People brought cookies. The rule book was revised, but more importantly, the spirit of the neighborhood was restored. Where once there were fines and threats, now there were food drives and cleanup days. A community bulletin board featured birthday announcements, garage sales, and help wanted notices instead of parking violations. And at the center of it all stood Hartman Community Hall, not just a building, but a beating heart. The award ceremony. Months later, Grandpa received an official letter from the Office of Veterans Affairs. He was to be honored at a statewide ceremony for outstanding contributions to community and country. I read the letter aloud to him as he sat under the old oak tree in the front yard. When I finished, he was quiet for a while. "I didn't do it for awards," he said softly. "I know," I replied. "That's why you deserve it." At the ceremony, they played clips from the news story, and neighbors from Oak Ridge showed up in droves holding homemade signs. "Thank you, Grandpa Hartman. We love our hero. Oak Ridge proud." When he was wheeled onto the stage, the entire auditorium rose to their feet in applause. Some even wiped away tears. He saluted with shaky hands and in a trembling voice said, "I just wanted to be remembered for more than just my uniform. I wanted to be remembered as a neighbor, a friend, a builder. Thank you for letting me be that." A final goodbye. 3 weeks later, Grandpa passed away, peacefully in his sleep. There were no hospital beeps or sterile white rooms, just the soft rustling of leaves outside his window and the sound of a distant wind chime on the porch. He was buried with full military honors, flag draped, taps played, rifles fired. But Oak Ridge had its own farewell planned. The entire community gathered at Hartman Hall. Photos lined the walls. Stories were shared. Children recited poems. Veterans saluted. Then, in a ceremony organized by the new HOA board, the Hartman Memorial Scholarship was launched, offering yearly awards to local youth pursuing civil service or community development. His legacy wouldn't just live on, it would grow. Epilogue. From Grief to Glory. It all began with injustice, an HOA that saw an old man as an inconvenience, and it ended with a movement, a revival, a message. Community is not enforced, it's nurtured. I still walk past Hartman Hall every week. Sometimes I hear laughter, other times a band practicing, once a wedding, but always I feel his presence. The man who refused to be erased, the neighbor who built more than walls. He built belonging. Final quote on the wall: "A house is wood and nails. A home is people and stories. And a community is what you fight to protect." Thomas Hartman.